The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, stop me if you've heard this before. Tisha Thompson, ESPN, tweets out, ESPN interviewed more than 36 current and former employees, many of whom described a workplace they found abusive and intimidating, in part due to fear of the owner's unpredictable tirades. Guess what? It's not the Commanders. No, it's the Cardinals, the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I haven't had time to take a dive into this. Very interested in reading it, but this is not refreshing in any way, but it's just, just odd that you read something like that about an NFL team and it's not the Commanders. It does not appear that any of that still exists in the organization. I'm sure that they've done everything they can to sweep that mess out of there along with the residue of Dan Snyder. But the residue of Dan Snyder remains still, and I would expect that there will be major changes in the offseason, including the coach that he hired to be the coach-centric coach in Ron Rivera, which clearly has not worked out. And yesterday we saw Josh Harris step forward and say, well, not say, but say by his deeds, yeah, we're going to take it from here, Ron. So, you can coach out the rest of the season. But we're building for the future. We're building on draft capital. We're going to have 9 picks in the draft next year. We've got the number 2 from a team that's probably going to finish in the bottom 3 or 4 of the league in the Chicago Bears. We unloaded a player who you took number 2 overall in Chase Young, and you got a 3rd-round pick in return. And from the reporting, it may be addition by subtraction because does not appear that any tears were shed over the departure of Chase Young, who reportedly was not following the system. And that was the feeling I got all along, that he really was not fitting into the defense that they were running. He was, looking for his own sacks, his own numbers. And, ironically, he goes on the same day as Montez Sweat. Now, some of the reporting said that they didn't really want to part with Montez Sweat, but the Bears' offer was so good that they couldn't turn it down. A 2nd-round pick for a guy who they were unlikely to sign in the offseason. This is an offensive league. You can only spend so much money on defense, and you got Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne at $43 million of your cap. You just can't spend that kind of money on defense in a league where points are a premium. That's what you want. You want to score points. Defense is important, but, they're going to make do with a guy named Casey Toohill, who even Mrs. Toohill hasn't really heard of. So it's okay. It's fine what they did this season. If things fell incredibly into place and they made a run and they slipped into the playoffs as the last wild card and went out in the 1st round, would you feel any better than if they did what they did yesterday and basically cleared the decks for the draft for next year? Isn't that really what you want as a fan? The malaise that has existed here, not just the terrible teams, the multiple 3-13 teams, but it's more the fact that they would consider themselves to be almost there. They always tell you we're real close. We're just player here, player there. We're getting there. No, they never did. They never did. So while Josh Harris has not won a championship in the NBA with the Philadelphia 76ers with the process, he greatly improved the team and made him a contender. Now, James Harden proved to be a bum, and they shipped him out, and they start over, but they still have Joel Embiid and some good players. And, maybe they can still be a contender for a championship depending on what they do in the trades and so forth, and maybe future drafts and all that. But this is what had to be done. You had to do all that. And John Keim, and we're going to play some of what John said yesterday after the trades were made, but let me read you this tweet that he put out regarding the players that will be taking the places of Sweat and Chase Young. He said, where is this? Come on, Twitter. Here we go. He says, talking on the podcast on this, but thinking the D is cooked minus Sweat Young is inaccurate. 2 years ago in 6 games with James Smith-Williams and Tuhill as the starting defensive ends, the teams went 4-2. Points per game went from 29.9 in the other 11 games to 17.5. Yards per game, 400 to 284. Also against the run, went from 4.3 a carry to 3.9. Quarterbacks faced during this time, Dak, Russell Wilson, who was still good at that time, Jalen Hurts, and Derek Carr. But again, more has to improve for the defense to duplicate the success. So, look, you got rid of 2 guys who 2 years ago spent all of training camp chirping about, I mean, it's 3 years ago now, chirping about how they were going to set the combined sack record together. And what happened is neither one of them was that good in the first half of the season. This would have been 2021, not 2022. And then Chase Young got hurt, and he came back last season, but maybe this will never come out, but here was my feel about his return from the knee injury. It was a serious knee injury, okay? Serious knee injuries happen in the NFL, but ACL surgery is somewhat routine. I wonder if they were hesitant to put him back on the field because they knew he would be disruptive. They knew he was only going after his own numbers, and they finally put him back with 3 games to go. And he did play pretty well, or at least to the untrained eye like mine, looked pretty good. But probably wasn't following the system. And I wonder if they even put him back on the field last year for the sole purpose of showcasing him to show other teams that he was recovered so they could trade him. And there just wasn't any interest, or interest low enough or high enough, I should say, that they would make the trade. Like they wind up, I mean, and we'll get to this. This is really nothing for the 49ers because they're going to get this pick back if he walks, and they had surplus picks, as you'll hear Adam Schefter explain. So, it all adds up to, I think, a win-win for them yesterday. They, I think, do addition by subtraction, and I don't think that the defense will be markedly worse without the 2 of them. Now, they do provide depth, so if James Smith-Williams and Tuhill get hurt, okay, then you got to have guys who can step in, and if you had 2 former first-round picks to do that, that might be helpful. But the reality is they were not going to sign either one of these guys, and or maybe they were thinking about Sweat. But the days of Chase Young being here are over, and it also addresses the new regime here in which Dan Snyder always valued stars. He sucked up to his stars. He gave contracts to stars when he shouldn't have. And now you've got a guy who was embracing the star culture. I mean, Chase Young thrived in it. He was making commercials. He even skipped all the voluntary offseason workouts so he could make commercials and said to reporters, hey, don't you want to make money? Well, yeah, but we make money in our jobs. We have our jobs first, and then we do other jobs. All right. This was Sweat on Sunday after the loss to Philadelphia here on the rumors about being traded that were already in high gear.
It's just one of those things that, that you can't really control. Just come here, go to work. All that type of stuff is out of my pay grade, so I just come here and work.
Knowing all that is out there, is it hard to focus or kind of do what you need to do during the week? Or
I mean, it's in the air. It's not necessarily, though. I mean, just lean on my brothers, play for the guys next to me. We got a strong group, so, yeah.
Yeah. Chase Young asked, and good question by Scott Abraham, about whether he wanted to stay or not. And his name was on the block as well. And I really felt like if they're going to trade one of them, it was more likely to be Young, though the Sweat rumors were higher, and there was even talk that he was going to go, pretty much certain that he was going to go to the Atlanta Falcons, not the Bears. This was Young on Sunday as well.
Do you want to be here still?
That's out of my control. In terms of evaluation, I'm going to go back and evaluate myself. See where I made mistakes and just hold myself accountable.
Are you still happy here?
For sure. Love Washington.
Well, you have to love Washington as a visitor. Your days of playing here are over with. He's with the 49ers, and as you'll hear here, this is Adam Schefter and also Louis Riddick with Mike Tannenbaum on the NFL show yesterday after the deal was announced with Schefter explaining that really the 49ers gave up nothing to make this happen.
It's a comp pick, and the 49ers had extra comp picks because they're getting one back for the loss of Mike McGlinchey, the loss of Rand Carthon, the loss of D'Amico Ryans. And so they figured they had all this extra ammunition. We might as well go for it now. We're close to winning. Let's add an extra part. They checked in on any number of players and wound up getting Chase Young to bolster that defensive line, thinking you never have enough defensive line talent up front. They already traded for Randy Gregory, basically given away by Denver. Now they go get Chase Young. They match him up with Nick Bosa, with Eric Armstead, with Javon Kinlaw, with all the players they have there. They're just loaded up front. And by the way,
look at that. Look at that.
Yeah. Wait, Laura, did you notice that he didn't mention the school that Nick Bosa
Ohio State.
and Chase Young
the
play at?
Michigan guy here.
Yeah.
Are you going to put a "the" in front of the Ohio State, Tannenbaum? I feel it coming out of your mouth. All right, that's Mike Tannenbaum. Adam Schefter, Louis Riddick is with us as well. Nick Bosa and Chase Young, of course, the former Buckeyes reunited on that D-line. And if you got pass rushers and good quarterback play, you're probably going to win at least some semblance of playoff games. Louis, when you think about the 49ers' perspective on this, they've been through a little skid lately, especially offensively, but what does this mean for them going forward when it really matters?
I mean, this is ridiculous, Laura. I mean, honestly, look, I think last year we talked about the fact that down the stretch, Philadelphia last year, right? We talked about the waves of pass rushers they could throw at you, 8 deep, basically on the defensive line that they could throw at you, and that was their calling card, along with offensive line play late in the season. This is going to be San Francisco's calling card, although it's already, look, the blueprint's already been laid out there. This is how they do things. Think about, Nick Bosa. When you think of the guys that they have now, along with Randy Gregory, Eric Armstead, this is unbelievable. Chase has to be looking at this going, I'm back with one of my guys. I'm back with some of the best pass rushers, some of the best athletes in the NFL. And here's the kicker. I'm being coached by maybe the best defensive line coach in all of the entire National Football League right now, in Chris Kasarik. That's as good as it gets. If you're John Lynch, you're sitting back in your chair and you're kind of opening up your shirt and you're just like, today's a good day. Because things are looking good for the 49ers on the defensive line. No question about it.
Yeah, I agree with Lou. I had a chance to work with Chris Kasarik in Miami. He's outstanding. And this started going back to Adam's point in March, first day of free agency. What do? They go sign Javon Hargrave. So this is great organizational alignment. The only other thing I can think of is if you're the Detroit Lions, you have this great Monday night win. You like your team, but one of the voids you have is pass rush opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And now all of a sudden one of your rivals in the NFC goes out and gets, Chase Young, and Montez Sweat goes to Chicago. It can't feel great in Detroit knowing that you have a window right now and your competitors got better and we didn't.
Yeah, they're kind of new to this. The Lions this year are new money. 49ers, it's not their first rodeo. What they did was they gave up essentially nothing to get Chase Young, and they say to Chase Young, you see that stable of pass rushers over there? You might recognize that guy Bosa. I believe you played in college with him. We got plenty of you. So you either follow our system and do what we want you to do with your skills, or we discard you. We didn't give up anything to get you. It wasn't the case here. Chase Young became, in many ways, the face of the franchise, and the face of the franchise has been a disgrace. It's hopefully moving in another direction. And that just wasn't, it wasn't the case here. He was always treated like a star. He tended to act like a star. Wasn't a bad guy, but it just didn't work out. And this was the first draft pick that the coach-centric operation of Ron Rivera made, and now he's gone for a third-round pick. John Keim, who has covered the team forever, does a podcast, his take on the trading of Montez Sweat and Chase Young yesterday.
I do think that if they felt like they could get Montez Sweat at a certain price, I think they would have kept him. And I don't know what that price is, but I do think, or that, I think that would have been a more possibility. I don't think with Chase Young that they were going to keep him after this year. I think one of the reasons why his value was only at a third round was because teams had concerns about the durability of his knee and long-term durability. And I think that's going to prevent him on the open market, perhaps, from getting the kind of deal that many would have expected from a player of his talent. So now you have 5 draft picks in the top 100 in April. You have 3 picks in the top 50. I think that's pretty good. Something that I've wanted them to do for a few years is to keep adding more picks and add some more picks in the top 3 rounds. So it gives you the chance to go be aggressive. Just like, and the organization that I love talking about in this regard is the Eagles, because that's what they do. They load up on assets, and if they don't get something in the draft, they have assets. They can go get a player when they need it in a trade. Kevin Byard, right? That's another example. AJ Brown, they went and got, right? So guys like that, they can go get because they do a really good job of collecting assets, and that's what these guys did here. And yes, it's tough to give up 2 former first-round picks, especially the 2nd overall pick in the draft. But again, what has this group done? They haven't done anything, and they've already invested in the defensive tackles. So perhaps if you hadn't already made the heavy investment in Daron Payne and John Allen, maybe you then go invest in the defensive ends. But they've already made that investment. So I think it behooved them, and how there's a word, and I don't use that word very often, especially on the podcast, behooved them to look for a deal that could net them a good return for these players, get good value.
That's John Keim yesterday on his podcast. And Jerry Brewer's got a column in the Post today with more insight on this. He says, during what was supposed to be an era of defensive line abundance that expedited Ron Rivera's effort to build a winner, the Commanders instead went 25-32-1, made 1 playoff appearance, and never posted a winning season. In this span, their defense went from great to regressive to solid to miserable. They have allowed the 2nd most points in the NFL this season and the 4th most yards. And for the remaining 9 games, the Commanders 3-5 must make do without 2 defensive ends who have combined for 11.5 sacks in 2023. So what he's saying is, with their 11.5 sacks, they still were 2nd worst in points allowed, and they've lost 5 of their last 6 games. More from Brewer. He says, look at the defense right now. You see 3 players every team in the NFL we consider unquestioned keepers. Allen and Payne, who are on their 2nd contracts, and safety Cam Curl, a great success story of this regime as a 7th-round pick in 2020, who should be in line for a new deal. Under Rivera, Washington has drafted 16 defensive players, 6 of whom were taken in the first 3 rounds. 3 are starters: Curl, linebacker Jamin Davis, and cornerback Benjamin St. Juste. And, they were ready to boot Jamin Davis out the door last year. He was a first-round pick. So this is again, highlighting what a coach-centric operation means when you got somebody who's not experienced picking players, is a defensive guy, and just hasn't worked out. That's why everything is going to be changed next year. There's going to be, I believe, a new president of the team, a new general manager, an actual general manager, and a new head coach and a coaching staff. And then, he goes over the numbers that Young produced when he was here. He's 24 years old. He's got 14 career sacks in 34 games. Has missed a year and a half because of injuries, and this is again the star culture that this organization has fostered, and if you can take a look at many of the problems they've had over the 24 years that Dan Snyder owned the team, this is front and center. He writes, this is Brewer on Chase Young. As a rookie, he was a difference maker. Washington finished 2nd in the NFL in total defense, made a surprise NFC East title run despite finishing 7-9. Then player immaturity and bad team management stalled progress. Young became the face of disappointment. It was bigger than him, but as the last product of a star culture that former owner Dan Snyder loved to foster to the detriment of his coaches and organization, Young became enamored with the transcendence before he established himself as a football player. The injuries humbled him, and when he finally got healthy and comfortable, it was too late for him. Remember, after that rookie year, when he was good in the second half of the season, defensive rookie of the year, 7.5 sacks. I mean, not threatening anybody's record with that, but okay, showed some real promise there. He didn't show up at any of the offseason workouts because he was making commercials. He was busy being a star. He was busy being what this organization had loved under Dan Snyder. Oh, look at this. We got a bright and shiny star, number 2 pick of the draft, defensive rookie of the year. And all Ron Rivera could do was grit his teeth because he drafted him. He's the one that made the decision to take him over Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa, 2 guys who look like they are franchise quarterbacks right now, and one of them who is being paid like one in Herbert. So there you go. And the era ends with the 2 of them. A lot of people are shaking their heads what's going on with the Chicago Bears. Why would they give up a second-round pick for a guy who's going to be a free agent at the end of the year? One thing is they have no pass rush. They have 6.5 sacks. 5 of them were against the Commanders. So there's that. And also you can franchise them for next year. So that's part of the thinking of, at least they can have somebody. Because I think the Bears are going to have a tough time attracting some high-level free agents, and they figure, well, okay, we get Sweat in. If we can't sign him to a long-term deal, we franchise him. You're still going to have to pay him $20 million, but you franchise him next year, and then you can decide what you're going to do with the rest of your defense, and if it looks good enough, maybe you can get Sweat to sign a long-term deal. We'll have much more on this coming up. I want to get to the World Series, the team of my youth on the cusp of it, the Texas Rangers with a 3-1 series lead. They can close it out. The Washington Senators began in 1961, broke my heart when they left in 71, could in some ways uplift me tonight if they win the World Series, which you'll hear here on ESPN 630. Get to that and more as we continue on the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630. Hey, we got Tony coming up today at 11 o'clock. In the next hour, we will take a look more at the World Series, take a further look. But let me just give you my initial thoughts on where the Texas Rangers are now. And good for them for overcoming the injury to Adolis Garcia, who in many ways has been, I'm not comparing him to Reggie Jackson, but he's the straw that stirs the drink and hits the big home run and inflames the other team and all that. And he is unable to play for the rest of the series. He, I don't know if they can call it an oblique strain, but he took a very hard swing in Game 4 in the 8th inning and had to leave the game. They checked him out yesterday hoping that he could be ready to play, but he's out for the rest of the series, as is Max Scherzer, who gave them 3 innings the other night and then his back tightened up. They're on the hook for him for his contract for next year. They had to pick it up in order to make the trade at the deadline. And, he give him 3 games during the postseason. Not great performances, but 3 innings the other night on their way to a close victory. And last night should have been a lopsided victory. A lot of us went to bed at 10-0 figuring, okay, that's it. And the fact that the Diamondbacks at least made it reasonably close, losing the game 11-7, was interesting. But even without Garcia, to be able to do what they were able to do last night shows you that somebody like Tim Kurkjian is well aware of.
And let's not forget the Rangers led the American League in runs scored. They led the American League in walks. They have a wildly explosive team. They scored 10 or more runs 26 times during the regular season and now 3 more in the postseason. That's the most in baseball. And when you got Corey Seager swinging like this and the rest of that lineup contributing, again, this is a nightmare of an offense to pitch to.
And Tim is like me, a kid from Bethesda. He's 2 years older than I am. Went to, appropriately, Walter Johnson High School, but grew up going to Washington Senators games, expansion Senators games. And he has to remain impartial, and he's very careful about this. He's a top-notch reporter. But I'm sure there's a little bit of his heart that's with the Texas Rangers tonight, like mine. Because we watched this team be here for, 11 years. They left after the 1971 season. And, that was especially with the passing of Frank Howard this week, that was the team that we remember so well and remember even more this week. And I'll get to a little bit later on what Tom Boswell wrote about Hondas. So glad he wrote something today. And Tom Lavero's got a nice piece about him as well in the Washington Times. But, to think that this team has gone all this time after leaving, 52 years, without winning a World Series. They've been there a couple of times as the Texas Rangers. In fact, they went in back-to-back years in 2010 and 2011, lost both times. But now they're right there. And, yeah, we've seen teams blow 3-1 leads before, but I like their chances. I like their chances actually tonight because they're so good on the road. I don't know, recently they haven't done as well at home, matching what the Nationals did 4 years ago in winning all their road games on their way to knocking out Houston in the American League Championship Series. But as you look at them and think about their roots, as I do, if you're old enough to remember that, there's something there. And there have been 2 teams that have moved since 1971. The Senators, who got the approval of the other American League owners before they did it and go to Texas. And the other was the Montreal Expos, who didn't need approval because they were owned by Major League Baseball. So really only once in that period of time have owners voted to allow a team to move, and they voted to allow the Senators to leave and become the Texas Rangers, which was a travesty at the time and made even worse by the fact that we didn't have baseball in the nation's capital for 33 years. And there are generations now here that have had a team, or at least one, that has grown up knowing nothing but baseball in Washington, D.C. There's so many years that we were pining for a team and so many false hopes. I had Steve Buckhantz on yesterday to talk about Frank Howard, and in 1993, so going back 30 years ago, he had a story that the Houston Astros were going to move to Washington, and it was a done deal, and the only thing that prevented it from happening is Houston came up with the money to build them a stadium, built them a new ballpark downtown, and they stayed. Otherwise, we would have had baseball a lot earlier, National League Baseball, and it would have been a wonderful thing not to have all those years of baseball here that we missed out on. It's been great since they've come here, and we have a World Series champion, which we could not have dreamed of when the expansion Senators were here. And my dad, who grew up rooting for the original Senators, he was 5 years old when they won the pennant the last time. So the teams that he watched in the 1940s and the 1950s, they were terrible. They were terrible teams. And, you know, when they left town as in 1960 to become the Minnesota Twins, you know, people said, well, okay, you know, it's there's some good young stars on this team like Harmon Killebrew, but they still weren't winners. And then we got the expansion Senators, who were just awful, and the Twins went on to make it to the World Series in 1965. So it's kind of a culmination of things tonight, and maybe some irony in the fact that Frank Howard dies on the 4th anniversary of the World Series championship, which was the first one in Washington in 95 years, and then possibly in the same week, the Texas Rangers, who he briefly played for. Remember, he moved with the team in 1971, was traded that season to the Detroit Tigers, and actually hit the first home run in the history of Arlington Stadium, Major League home run, which when I was there in the early 80s was woeful in terms of being a ballpark. It was a converted minor league park, which didn't measure up to major league parks in any way. But he was pivotal in the move there. He would be the first drawing card that they had. They didn't really draw anybody. In fact, those Texas Rangers were really in danger those first couple of years of having to move again because people weren't showing up. And the one who really saved the franchise was David Clyde. David Clyde was a high school phenom from Houston, and he was drafted number one by the Rangers in 1973, and 2 weeks after his graduation pitched pretty well. But in those days, they didn't keep track of pitch counts. They didn't recognize the need to bring him along slowly. And basically, he blew his arm out, and the rest is history. But the fact that 25,000, which is not a big crowd in any means, but enough to get people, interested in going back, 25,000 showed up to see his major league debut, gave the Rangers some life, and they have survived all this time to now being on the cusp of a World Series championship. So that's a pretty cool thing. NFL thing, if you're not up to speed on this, you probably heard about this, but this happened at 1 o'clock in the morning. The Raiders announced the firing of head coach Josh McDaniels and general manager Dave Ziegler. And man's taking his place. You may remember this name, Antonio Pierce. That Antonio Pierce. He was an undrafted free agent coming out of Arizona and signed by the Marty Schottenheimer Washington Redskins in 2001. And became a pretty good linebacker for them, in fact, a very good linebacker, and was part of Joe Gibbs' first return team in 2004. And Gibbs didn't really understand the salary cap. He was enamored with the fact that they could sign free agents because they couldn't do that the last time he had coached after leaving after the 92 season. Comes back at 04, free agency is here. Oh, boy, wow. But he didn't account for the salary cap. They wanted to re-sign Antonio Pierce, didn't have the money. He went to the Giants as a free agent and was all pro in 2006 and won a Super Bowl with them in 2007. So he's taking over. He's been their linebackers coach. He's African-American, so another opportunity here, which is, unfortunately, when African-Americans get their opportunity to become head coaches, it's generally in an interim situation and an impossible situation, which it is here, as the Raiders have been a disaster this year. They're 3-5 after losing on Monday night. And this from the ESPN story, Josh McDaniels, who's been through this before. He didn't last 2 full seasons with the Broncos, 2009 to 2010, and now he lasts about a season and a half with the Raiders. They're right here. McDaniels and Ziegler, the GM, both hired in 2022, inherited a 10-7 team that made an unexpected run to the playoffs during the 2021 season. The Raiders, though, win a combined 9-16 without a playoff appearance under the new regime. McDaniels did not last 2 full seasons in his previous stop as head coach either, going a combined 11-17 with the Broncos from 2009 to 2010. So what? He leaves 9-16 and was 11-17, means he was 20-35, right? 20-35, not too good. Not too good at all. The Raiders suffered some of the worst embarrassing defeats in franchise history under the McDaniels-Ziegler duo. That included blowing a 20-0 halftime lead against Arizona for the biggest collapse in franchise history, losing to the Indianapolis Colts in the first game with Jeff Saturday as interim coach after he'd never coached above the high school level, blowing a double-digit lead to Baker Mayfield and the Los Angeles Rams 2 days after Mayfield joined his new team, and getting shut out in New Orleans when the starting offense failed to cross the 50-yard line. 2 weeks ago, Vegas lost 30-12 to Chicago, and undrafted rookie former Division II quarterback Tyson Bagent in his first career start. The Raiders this season moved on from Derek Carr, been there 9 years, benched him, was inactive last 2 weeks of last season. In March, they signed the often injured Jimmy Garoppolo, McDaniels' former pupil in New England, to a 3-year, $72.7 million free agent contract. Shortly after signing with Las Vegas, Garoppolo underwent foot surgery, caused him to miss the entire Raiders offseason and on-field program and be on a pitch count in training camp. He's missed 2.5 games this season due to concussion and back injury, and leads the NFL in interceptions with 9. Pierce will be the 8th different coach, interim or regular, for the Raiders since Davis took control of the team after the death of his father, Al Davis, in October of 2011. He follows Hugh Jackson, Dennis Allen, Tony Sperano, Jack Del Rio, John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia, and McDaniels. So look at that murderer's row of coaches. Outside of John Gruden, who won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, these are all, retread, has-been coaches, never was, not even has-beens. They just never was. And this is not a good record of hiring that Davis has done. You could argue, well, maybe Gruden was developing something there, but was fired after the Bruce Allen emails were leaked. Pierce will make his head coaching debut on Sunday against the Giants, so that's kind of cool. That's the team that he played for and won a Super Bowl with, and maybe a team that's going through as much mishigas as they are, because they're 2-6 on the year. The Raiders actually have one more win than them. So, oh well, churn and burn. And one other thing on the Commanders and the deals they made yesterday, getting rid of Sweat and Young, it is a move in the direction of next year, and it's a move towards a new coaching staff, which is inevitable, barring an absolute miracle of 9 straight wins or something like that to end of the season. But it also is an indication that Ron Rivera signed off on it, because I don't know this, and maybe, we'll find out more when he holds his news conference today, but I got to believe that there was ownership input on this. I can't believe this was all done on his own. He's the coach-centric coach, and I don't think that's something you do with the team. You're going to desperately find a way to try and get into the playoffs. You're not going to get rid of 2 first-round picks at defensive end. It's just not something you're going to do. So clearly ownership had input in here, but I wonder if Josh Harris went to Ron Rivera and said, look, this is what we're going to do. If you'd like to be relieved of your duties, we can do that. We can do that now. And maybe Rivera said, no, I'm just speculating here. but his legs have been chopped out from under him. I mean, there's no question about the move here. This is ownership coming in and saying we're playing for next year when the coach is saying we're playing for this year. I don't know what he can say to the media today that will say anything else other than we're going towards next year. Yeah, you could say we have a lot of faith in Casey Tuhill and James Williams and all that stuff, but really, these are, and especially Young, who was the number one pick of this regime, the number 2 pick of the 2020 draft. So this is clearly a process, as Josh Harris had in Philadelphia, the process, and this is a process move and a process that ultimately will not involve Ron Rivera after this season. We'll talk more about the Commanders and the trades from yesterday, more about the World Series, and much more as we continue with the Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630. But Tony's got a show coming up at 11 o'clock today. I'm sure he'll talk a lot about the World Series, which I'm going to get into here. Mike Locksley held his weekly news conference yesterday with Maryland getting ready to play Penn State at home on Saturday afternoon. Not looking good after 2 ugly losses, one at home on homecoming against Illinois. Then they had the bye week, and they laid an absolute egg last week at Northwestern, and a team that was, talking about, or at least he was talking about, competing for Big Ten championships. That's not going to happen this year, and it may be a while before that happens. Talia Tagovailoa is leaving after this year. He's finally out of eligibility. I think this was his 6th year in college, and he'll be off somewhere next year, probably in the NFL, but we'll see. But we'll see who replaces him. But this might have been their best year to have a great year, and it's turned to be a sour year with a winless month of October. They played well for a half at Ohio State, and ever since then have looked absolutely terrible. So with Penn State coming in and the history between the two teams, not good at all. Penn State wins. In fact, back in 1976, when Maryland had its 11-0 season, that was with the late, great Mark Mangus, who just passed away. They went 11-0, and they went to the Cotton Bowl and lost to Houston, University of Houston. That team didn't play Penn State that year. That was certainly helpful in getting them to an undefeated perfect season. They had some good players on that team, but really it was helpful not to play Penn State. And whenever you see Penn State on the schedule, it's not good. They don't even beat them at home. They beat them on the road the last 2 times. They beat them in 2020, pandemic year, so things were skewed there. And then in 2014, they beat him as well with Randy Edsall. That's probably the biggest win that Randy Edsall had in his Maryland run, which was a complete disaster. Locksley was actually on that staff and remembers that, but also remembers how classless they were in that game. They went out for the coin flip, and the Maryland captains refused to shake hands with the Penn State players. And Locksley said, that's not going to happen again. That won't be the case on Saturday when they meet in College Park. And we'll get to that. But some World Series yak, and what we saw last night from the Texas Rangers, who wouldn't go to bed if you go to bed early when it's 10-0 and wake up to find out, 11-7, they made it kind of close. But the Rangers came out of the gates big time. Corey Seager with a blast. He's the straw that's stirring the drink now that Adolis Garcia is going to be out. He has an oblique strain, which means he can't swing a bat. It's just impossible. So he's out for the series. And Max Scherzer has back trouble. He's not going to play in the rest of the series. But it was Garcia who gathered his teammates yesterday. And look, these win one for the Gipper speeches, they may work in football. They may work in basketball, maybe hockey. I just don't see him working in baseball. Getting fired up to play baseball seems a little foreign to me. It seems like it's more about concentration, because you're concentrating on a little ball that's coming at you 100 miles an hour with spin on it. I mean, do you get more motivated to hit that? No, I don't think it works that way. But it may have worked for him last night, because he got the teammates together and told them how much he loved them. And they went out and they kicked butt. Now, this was a bullpen game. that the Diamondbacks went to, and that isn't always the best way to go. And it wasn't last night, as that bullpen gave up 10 runs in the first couple of innings, first 3 innings. But they said the part of Garcia's pregame message centered on the team's penchant for overcoming injuries. The number of Rangers players who spent time on the injured list during the regular season includes 6 fixtures in their lineup: Seager, Taveras, Jonah Heim, Mitch Garver, Josh Jung, and even Garcia himself. 2 key members of the rotation, Nathan Eovaldi and John Gray, and 2 high-leverage relievers, Josh Sborz and Jose Leclerc. Jacob deGrom, remember, he was a free agent signing in the offseason. They lost him to Tommy John surgery. Max Scherzer, who they picked up at midseason, suffered a shoulder injury in late September, didn't come back till the ALCS, and now is out with back spasms. So the message is, basically, next man up. We can do this, and we can get contributions from other people, which they did in a big way from Seager once again, a 431-foot home run off the right field center, just over the right field center field fence, he said. And Marcus Semien, who had a 2-run triple in the second and a 3-run homer in the third. We'll get to Semien, but this was the breakdown after the game with the Fox crew, which has Kevin Burkhardt, Alex Rodriguez, David Ortiz, and Derek Jeter, who I must tell you, seems to me to be dead weight in all of this, but he's a big name, so he's part of the crew, and this is how they looked at what the Rangers did last night, winning 11-7.
Adolis Garcia, injured, out for the rest of the series. How would they respond? They responded by scoring 11 runs.
Well, not only 11, but before you can blink, fellas, the Rangers hit for the cycle in the second inning, and Heaney pitched terrific, and off we go.
And once again, Cody Seager, man, just showing up. I mean, it seems like the Garcia situation never happened. I mean, it was unbelievable, this offense tonight. And, man, let me tell you, 1 win away from the World Series.
Yeah, I tell you, we talked about it before the game that with Garcia out is going to take a collective effort from them, especially the bottom of the order. 6 through 9 had 3 hits coming into this game. In the first 3 games, they had 4 tonight.
Wow.
They had 3 RBIs. They scored 6 runs. So you're talking about up and down the lineup contributing.
Yeah, and KB, the first 10 runs after 2 outs. We talk about what a backbreaker that is. And again, not to pick on Walker, but after the error, 5 more runs. And this Ranger offense, they're so good, fellas. You can't give them 28, 29, 30 outs. They'll murder you.
And you can't pitch a Corey Seager, Poppy. I mean, it's absurd now. His postseason numbers, the legend continues to grow here. He's been amazing. Another home run for him tonight.
I keep on telling you, 19th career home run in the postseason. I mean, look at this swing right here, guys. Ouch! This guy looked like he's on top of every pitch. I mean, that wasn't a slider kind of running away from him, and he was down there and got him. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, this guy, how he can drive any type of pitch in the zone out. Last night was a changeup. The other night was a fastball. Now it's in a slider, kind of going down and away from him.
He's locked in. Look, I told you he was my favorite player. You're trying to take him as your favorite
come on,
player
man.
now, too. I told you. I said, this guy's my favorite player, man. He is fun to watch. I mean, he's as locked in as anyone at the plate. And he doesn't just get hits, he does damage. And you know, we sit here and we say all the time, we did it with Alvarez in the Houston series. Why do you continue to pitch to him? You can't even throw him a strike because he's aggressive. He's attacking first pitches, and he's the big reason why they're here.
And later in the show, they talked to Marcus Semien, who had the big night last night, the 2-run triple in the second and a 3-run homer in the third as they broke this game wide open at 10-0. Semien, again, talking to the Fox pre- and post-game show, led by Kevin Burkhardt, Alex Rodriguez, David Ortiz, and Derek Jeter.
When you get the news and you know Adolis is out for the rest of the postseason, how do you deal with that as players on this team? How do you come together, which you guys obviously did tonight?
Yeah, I mean, he's been so hot for us. But we lost him before. We lost him in the regular season. And we've got guys like Jankowski, Grossman, Duran got put on the roster, guys who had good years. Obviously, it's a World Series, so time to get your hands going. Jankowski, big hit, 2 RBIs. Good. He's a good defender and good base runner. So, you know, big night for him. But I'm feeling for Adolis. You know, he was on his way to his. I mean, he already had a historic postseason. But I'm feeling for him because he's out now.
Marcus, we've said all along in October, you're the key to this team. You were the igniter. That was your first home run in over a month. How gratifying was that? Or was the triple just as gratifying for you?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't jogged around the bases in a while. I think, you know, last week of the season, had a home run. I've had stretches like that before. You know, obviously bad timing for that, but I'm gonna keep working. You know, I kept working. Had to simplify some things at the plate just to, you know, get on the fastball and see the slider a little bit better. And things went well, you know, tonight for sure.
I mean, I keep on telling my teammates right here that is there one guy on the lineup that I don't worry about not hitting at the moment is you. And it's because I have seen you over the years demolish baseball, figuring things out from one game to another. And tonight, you approached, and last night, I saw some good at bat. What was the mindset coming into the game today, especially knowing that Garcia wasn't there?
Yeah, I just wanted to build off yesterday. I think that, you know, I got in the cage, you know, tried to stay a little bit more square, load a little bit straighter, don't dive too much just because they're throwing outside. Just try and see the ball better. If you see the ball better, you got a good swing path, you'll be better off than trying to dive. So that's what I did because I knew that's what they wanted to try and do is stay away.
That's right.
But I'm thinking if I could stay on some sliders, it might change some things for me.
And they did. Again, the triple in the second inning, 2 runs, and then a 3-run homer in the third. Actually, been enough to at least equal what the Diamondbacks did last night. And with some help from his friends, they scored 11 runs and are on the cusp of winning the World Series, which they can get done tonight. Now, with Frank Howard passing away this week, I was just thinking how many of the Senators who moved to Texas in 1971 are still alive. I think Toby Harrah is. He was a young second baseman, started the last year the Senators were here in 71 and played a long time with the Rangers, spent many years with the Cleveland Indians, and then came back and finished his career with the Rangers. They had Jeff Burroughs, who's an outfielder, who went with them. Dick Bosman was the ace of the staff here with the Senators and pitched several years with the Texas Rangers. I'm probably missing a few others. There were some who were like in the farm system who came up and played for them. Ted Williams managed one more year. He managed the 72 season for the Texas Rangers. But if they win, you know, just from my standpoint as an Ulticocker, and there aren't many of us left who are fans even, but you know, those of us who do remember the expansion Senators and them leaving for Texas in 1971, you know, what we'll feel if they win. And we've seen teams blow 3-1 leads before, so it's not impossible that the Diamondbacks come back and win the series. But if the Rangers keep hitting the way they are hitting, they will win and probably win tonight. And we can, you know, maybe celebrate just a little bit. I think it helps a lot that the Nationals have come here and won a World Series. I mean, just think about that, the drought that this organization has had. The 11 years they spent as the Washington Senators, never coming close to the playoffs. The best year they had was 69 when they finished 10 games over 500 and way behind the 110-win Orioles in that division. So they weren't going to the playoffs that year. And then they had 2 more losing seasons, went to Texas, and they did make the World Series twice but didn't win it. And in the meantime, we went 33 years without a team at all. We didn't have any baseball. And then a team comes back and wins the World Series 4 years ago. And finally now, this organization that began as the expansion Washington Senators in 1961 could win a World Series. So there's that. All right, little football here. Maryland is heading towards Saturday, and it does not look good as they take on Penn State. Penn State has lost once this year. That was Ohio State on the 21st of October, and it was a close game. They lost 20-12. They have a sophomore quarterback, Drew Aller. He's thrown only 1 interception all year, 16 touchdowns. They have a sophomore running back, Nick Singleton, who has rushed for 7 touchdowns, 10 in his freshman year, including 2 in a 30-0 rout of the Terrapins last year. And this series, since they began in 1917, Maryland has won only 3 times across 46 meetings with 1 tie. 2 of them have been on the road against the James Franklin-led teams, with the caveats of 1 coming in the first season in Happy Valley, 2014. That was, Franklin taking over after the Sandusky mess. They did have Bill O'Brien there for a couple of years, but they were still coming back from that. And the pandemic year of 2020, that's it. So Maryland and Penn State, not good, especially in College Park. And if you look at the Maryland records over the years, you'll see that seasons where they had great hope of winning big. There was even a year, I'm trying to think what year, maybe it was 84. that they were projected by Sport Magazine to win the national championship. Yeah, Maryland football. They had J.D. Marlavelle on the cover of the magazine, and they were projected to win it, and they got beaten by Penn State in the opener and never really got back on track after that. So it's not a great situation that they head into, and they're coming off a really awful stretch. They go 5-0 in September, and then October hits, and you have the loss to Illinois in the homecoming game. Then Kevin Sumlin, who was hired this year to be co-offensive coordinator, he's arrested for a DUI, hasn't been with the team, and now with all this investigation going on to the sign stealing for Michigan, Josh Gaddis, the current offensive coordinator, he's been named in this as well, and they have strung together just two god-awful losses, losing the homecoming game to Illinois and then just playing terribly last week with no poise in their game at Northwestern. Whole bunch of penalties, a bunch of unsportsmanlike. It was an embarrassment what they did. So, Loxley is now taking a more realistic look at things, but, not throwing in the towel.
It's disappointing. We're a team that, we talked about being ready to compete for championships, but obviously we're just not there yet. But that won't stop us from continuing to do the necessary work to get us to that point. But we're not going to shy away from having expectations here at Maryland for our football program, and we embrace it. It's something that, we've got to do our part. And it starts with me leading the program and everybody within the program being the best version of themselves going into the game and then performing at a high level during the game.
Okay, now this is, you can take this for what it's worth. You can look at it two ways, I think. One is it's somewhat of an excuse for playing as poorly as they did in October, and maybe it's kind of a setup for an expected blowout loss to Penn State on Saturday. This was Loxley again yesterday.
It's a little different program now because, Maryland is now a team that gets hunted before we show up and people say, oh, it's Maryland, and maybe they approach the game with the mentality of it's just Maryland. But right now, I don't think very many people, when we show up, say, hey, it's just Maryland. And so what our team has to do, and when we take this next step to become a championship-type program, is we've got to be able to learn how to play when you are the favorite, when you are expected to win. And those expectations are ones we're not going to shy away from.
Well, the problem with Loxley, and I think he's done a good job, he took over a very difficult situation at Maryland. You had a player who died on the practice field. They had to get rid of DJ Durkin, who was the head coach, and he came into a situation that had to be repaired. And I think he's done a good job with that. But his record in October and November, since he came to Maryland in 2019, is 9-22. And these last two losses, Illinois and Northwestern, they are two of the worst scoring offenses in the country, 20.4 points and 21.8 points a game. And Maryland gave up to Northwestern, a team that averages 21.8, 33 points. So it has not been a good run for Maryland, and it would be one of the big upsets. Maybe the biggest upset of the season has already happened, with Virginia off one win over William and Mary, going to undefeated and number 10 North Carolina and winning. But if Maryland wins this game against Penn State, this would be an enormous upset. They're number 9 in the country. They've lost once. They've lost once to Ohio State, which is, if you missed the rankings last night, number 1 team. So, they got Georgia number 2 and they got Michigan number 3. So if they are to pull this off, this would be pretty incredible.